Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Now That's Significant podcast. I'm Geoff Lowe, host for this episode, and I am joined today by Ray Poynter, the man who never sleeps in the insights industry, the man who's involved in pretty much everything and has been for many decades in the insights industry. Ray, how are you?
I'm great, Geoff. Thanks for inviting me. And now that phrase is a bit daunting, many decades.
Well, it is true, though, isn't it? I mean, it's true for me.
Yes.
I think it could be at least as true for you.
Yeah, I'm coming up to about 46 years.
Yeah,
so not far away from the fifth decade.
Well, and you know what? It feels, I feel like the contribution that people like you and I count myself, I'm not quite there yet. I'm about a decade and a half behind you, but I think we've still got a lot to offer. And
yes,
yeah, haven't we? I mean, we do need to be making way for the young ones, but you know, we're not going out to pasture just yet. And I want to kind of put that to the test and perhaps prove to the viewers and listeners that it is true. Because today I'm keen, and I'm sure you are too, to talk about the challenges facing the heads of corporate insights teams, the chief insights officers, I think is one label that is put with them. So can I just kick it off by asking you, just at a very high level, what are when you think about the role that the heads of corporate insights teams have right now and the challenges they face, what comes to mind first?
I think the biggest one is that they need to be leaders and facilitators and not order takers, because that order taking role is declining with all the rise of the super smart self-serve tools. Then they need to be coaches, they need to be encouraging best practice, they need to be setting best practice, they need to be teachers, judges, arbiters, advocates, rather than people who are commissioning agencies to run stuff or running ordinary simple stuff themselves. I think they will have a role for complex. So I think that transition away from being order takers, from being the people looking to make sure that risk was minimized, has really changed.
It sounds like you're describing classic leadership.
Yeah, I think that the insight leaders need to step up and be leaders rather than checkers or even in the worst cases, naysayers.
And are you making that observation because you see that is happening and that you know, the people that you're aware of, let's not name names, but there are people you're aware of that are failing to do what you're saying they should be doing?
Oh, I see plenty who are failing. I also see some are doing a really good job, and I will name at least one name. So Elaine Rodrigo at Reckitt Benckiser really typifies the modern approach to that of enabling, driving things forward. So that's all good. But there are still plenty around who are by nature, like most researchers, a little bit risk averse, who prefer measuring things to really get into grips with what do those things mean and how could they be used.
Yeah. So just thinking about clearly stepping up to a leadership role is number one. I personally, I'm with you 100% on that. I believe that our industry could really do with some really strong visionary leaders doing what you described. A day or so ago, you posted something on LinkedIn, which was, I think it was, what is worrying researchers at the moment? Did I get that right? So
yeah.
And you had a very informative word cloud as part of that post. And looking at that word cloud, there were two words that sprung out to me. And one of them was quality. The other one I'll come to because I think it's probably even more important. But let's just focus on quality. Is there a quality element to this discussion on insights leaders?
There is, and it goes back a long time. We've been aware that there are problems with online data for a couple of decades. One thinks back to Kim Dedeker when she was with the Procter & Gamble leading a quality initiative. We've had multiple quality initiatives. There's now been a lot of research, and some people are saying that panel data as first collected, about 30% of it might be not fit for purpose. People often say 30% of it is fraudulent. That's not what most of the studies are saying. It's saying that about a third of that 30% is actually the results of bad survey questions, bad survey design. So when they look at the cases, they see a survey starting sensibly, and then the responses drop off because it's too long, it's badly written, it's not engaging, it's not clear. But all in all, there is this problem with the data not being fit for purpose. The panel companies have been trying to tackle this for years with tools like AI to try to find that data, because what's happening at the moment is between the panel company, the agency, and the end client, they're aiming to strip out that 30%, so they end up with good data. And that is getting harder because of the increasing sophistication of the frauds, and because there hasn't been an improvement in the quality of surveys as well. By the quality of surveys, I don't mean the software. The software is great. I mean the questions people are asking and the way they're asking them. So we've got this real quality challenge, and there is a really big piece of good news, which is also a piece of bad news. There's a global initiative called the Global Data Quality Initiative, and we're seeing organizations that almost never work together, working together fantastically. So the Market Research Society, TRS in Australia, I know that RANDs have put their hands up too, Insights Association, ESOMAR, all working together with SampleCon representing the providers too, to try to tackle this, to make a real breakthrough. The bad news is this problem is so bad that people like the MRS, ESOMAR, Insights Association are all working together, because it required a really bad problem for everybody to drop their sort of the smaller issues that they look at and say, no, we've got to work on this together. And there are lots of strands going on to try to improve that. But if you are an insight manager at a corporation, you need to be worried about two things: the quality of the data that you are using on behalf of your client, but also the quality of the data that people like product managers are accessing via self-serve platforms. Are any humans looking at that data, or is that data simply going straight to an automated platform which goes to a data marketplace that buys the data, puts it in and uses it? Because it's quite likely in some of those self-serve platforms, you might be looking at 30% poor data.
So just picking up on one of the points you made early on there, that part of the poor quality that's being measured is because of poor questions. That sounds like another leadership thing for this group that we're talking about, leaders of corporate insights teams. Is that not a leadership?
I absolutely. So it's, first of all, if we look at when agencies being done, it's really challenge them around design and have they validated these approaches, and asking to see the data from the end of the survey if they have some sort of rating set. Every single one of my surveys for the last probably 30 years has had a question: is there anything else you'd like to tell me about this study or this topic? And that's a great way of finding out whether or not you've got engagement at the end of it, and people will tell you about problems. Other people put in scores. So how would you rate this survey on a 0 to 5, or would you recommend this survey to somebody else, and use an NPS question? So there should be quality methods. So if I were an insight manager, I'd be wanting to see the quality measures that the agency were providing. In terms of work I'm doing internally, I would want to have those quality measures, but I'd also be wanted to be investing in training for the people creating the surveys. we're seeing in the industry far too many 23, 24, 25-year-olds writing surveys with no training or support because of all the cost pressures. We're seeing really junior members of staff being expected to do something that when I joined the industry, they were trained to do. Now there is much less. And then the next level is coaching and advocating around the organization for all of your colleagues who are using these self-serve platforms or DIY platforms to ask the sensible questions. In general, if you are not a market researcher, you should almost never write a market research question. You should be using questionnaires that are already provided. You can adapt them very slightly to make them more localized, use local spellings, but really it is beyond most people with no market research knowledge to come up with brand new methods of measuring engagement. Yeah, that's a specialism. It's a postgraduate specialism. And we need people to understand that here is a whole smorgasbord. You can just select good questions from here, but don't go writing brand new ones. And then simple rules like you can't use a study unless you personally have done it on your mobile phone. Just as a really simple rule.
To what extent is that the quality issue that you mentioned earlier implicated in the increase in DIY, so research that is done without an agency involved?
When I talk to the panel companies, they say, whilst that is a problem, the stuff they're sent from professional companies is shocking.
Okay.
So the DIY is a problem, but it's we shouldn't look at that as the biggest problem.
Right. I mean, that is the quality of questions is something that we have absolute control over. Fraudulent responses is a lot harder, as you say. That's why all those organizations are together.
So that's, I mean, that's 2/3 of the problem. And it is getting super sophisticated. There have been some fantastic presentations now at conferences and congresses where they've interviewed some of the fraudsters who are sitting there in typically low-income countries. They have got 25 slave computers, so they're going into the survey. They're doing 25 copies of what they're doing to get paid. So the ludicrously low incentive of maybe $1 for a 15-minute interview becomes $25 for a 15-minute interview. And that, of course, is good living. So that is what they're trying to stop. There's a whole range of issues called ghosting, for example, where people learn how to go from the beginning of the survey to the end and bypass the middle. What are the questions that allow you to jump straight through? And we're beginning now to see, of course, AI being used to fill in those surveys. And those are going to be even harder to spot going forward.
I'm going to take that the mention of AI right there to come back to that word cloud that I mentioned in that post of yours from yesterday, because the other phrase rather than word, AI or acronym, artificial intelligence, was the other one that really jumped out at me. And I think reading through the comments for a few others as well, although I think most of the comments were on the quality. AI is obviously everywhere now. It's just astounding to think that it's only been a year since ChatGPT was released to the world.
Yeah.
And, I personally am using it almost daily, and I'm sure you are as well. That has to be having an impact on these the leaders of these insights teams on what they're thinking of the future and what they're currently doing now. What do you make of it all?
So what I'm seeing from most of the insight leaders is a little bit too slow. A lot of organizations have simply banned the use of generative AI, Bard, ChatGPT internally for all members of staff, including the insight teams. And I can see why they're doing that, but I think they need to have got moves on very quickly to putting up guardrails for this is how you need to use.
Why do you see they're doing that? What's the rationale for that?
To avoid being sued. So I think if we take the case of a couple of the lawyers in the United States who got into trouble because they asked ChatGPT to cite some cases, and they then submitted those as example to the judge of examples of similar cases that happened in the past. And they turned out to be hallucinations, things that did not exist, which of course got them into very serious trouble with the judge.
Yeah.
So if you are a corporation, you're one of the big blue chip companies, and you say something which is simply not true, or it is stolen copyright, then you are going to be into problems. So the compliance teams have just like slammed the brakes on in lots and lots of organizations.
I have had experience myself with asking questions of ChatGPT, and it gets it factually wrong. And I've corrected it, and ChatGPT is effusive in its apologies and thanks for the correction, which is all very lovely. But what that says to me is that ChatGPT at the moment is not a great tool for finding things out, but it's a great tool for creating things. So I've used it to write opening speeches when I'm presenting the Research Association Awards, for example. It's fantastic at that sort of thing. It's better than me. So when I hear that there are blanket bans on the use of it, I think to myself it's going a step too far. Here are companies who are failing to ride the wave. Do you feel the same?
Oh, yes. And obviously they're pushing suppliers then to come up with innovative solutions, but they're running the risk of not keeping quite up with the pace. And of course, what a lot of people are then doing is they're using it on their personal stuff. So that is one issue there. But so across the board, we're seeing a lot of wait and see from client-side organizations. But we are seeing the innovative people buying up solutions, because we are now seeing agencies providing interesting stuff. The term co-pilot we're seeing being used quite a bit, where you use some form of generative AI, and sometimes it's going to be ChatGPT, but sometimes it's the open source techniques, the llamas and so on, that people are bringing in. I think that if I were the internet manager at a corporation, I would want to have a specific program looking at what can we do now, what is coming down the line. I'd be looking at all of my upcoming contracts. Maybe at the end of this year, the CX contract is coming up. Middle of next year, our online communities contract is coming up. At the end of next year, maybe the brand tracker are coming up. And I'd be wanting to look and say, okay, are there opportunities to fundamentally change what we do, or to test doing things differently? Beyond that, can I use these techniques to help my colleagues improve their stuff? So if you are using one of the techniques which does not give your stuff to OpenAI to use as its training database, and that is not difficult now, then you could bring in a system which would validate everybody's questionnaires to say, okay, how could this questionnaire be improved? And what might this questionnaire get wrong? So I did a post a couple of weeks ago, where I simply played around with trying to use ChatGPT, this was, to improve my design of demographic questions. So I said, what questions should I typically ask to get the demographics for a market research survey right? And it came up with a nice list, and that would be useful to jog my memory about whether I'd missed anything. But then I said, well, actually, this is all US. Could you change it to UK? So it changed the ethnicity question. We have in the UK very few African Americans. We do have quite a lot of African Caribbean people. So you need to change the ethnicity, the education changes, the currency changes. I then said, could you do it for France, please? And it quite correctly removed the ethnicity question and said, you can't ask ethnicity in France. It's not legal. Now, that makes it better probably than the typical market researcher based in Auckland or Atlanta, who would not know necessarily about the laws in France, but might well be doing a global survey around that. So
I did not
doing
know
that
that.
sort of thing. Oh, right. Yeah. No, you can't ask ethnicity
I
in
should.
France.
I'm glad I now do. Thank you.
So the other case where ChatGPT would be up at the knowledgeable end, and you could imagine a tool inside any of these large corporations that said every time you do a self-serve DIY survey, ask it to the generative AI, is this clear? Could it be improved? Are there any obvious mistakes in this wording? That would be something that would make a lot of sense. And similarly, in terms of, we're going to see that more and more on the analysis and the writing side too. Most times when I write a blog, I now say to ChatGPT, can you improve my blog? And some of the improvements I like and some of them I don't. But I also use Grammarly. Grammarly is AI.
Yeah.
So I use that real time, not when I finish, but it's as I'm typing, it's making suggestions, some of which I reject, some of which I take. But that is AI, and it's helping us move forward. And I think that a lot of people don't realize how much AI is around us all the time.
Absolutely.
The ChatGPT broke on the scene late last year, but there's lots of other stuff.
Heaps, yeah. You've just made a suggestion actually to solve a problem that we covered earlier, the quality problem, or questionnaires. Right here is a tip. Anyone watching this, follow Ray's advice and get ChatGPT to vet your questions, because quality of questions is really important. I'm going to share an anecdote with you, and then I want to pose a question in the context of leaders of these corporate insights teams. As you know, the Research Association in New Zealand, of which I'm chair, we're putting together a conference for early next year, and the theme is the future of insights. Where are all the humans? And of course, that's a reference to everything that's going on that we've been discussing right now. And it is a follow-on from the last conference, which you were a invited speaker. Thank you. Which was AI in insights, friend or foe. I don't think we ever answered that question, but in putting together this next conference, I'm convinced that we are moving so fast, and there are plenty of people still out there not realizing how fast we're moving. So when I hear you say, for example, there are corporates who are doing blanket bans on AI, generative AI, I think that's a poor move. One of the people that I've approached to submit a paper has said that he doesn't want to submit his paper until right before the submission date, because things are changing so fast that if he writes a submission earlier, it's going to be out of date. So given the speed of how this is progressing and developing, how does that in itself present a challenge to our insights leaders?
It clearly does, because that's fine for somebody trying to present something to a conference. You can't run a business where I'm going to suspend all my planning and my budget considerations. You've got to put your budget in now or earlier than now for next year.
Right now.
And then you have to live with it for next year. So absolutely, that isn't a solution in lots and lots of places. In terms of the conference side, what we're seeing is some of the most interesting stuff are coming from the panel conversations, where you get 4 well-informed leaders in the field to talk about something, precisely because of that process. If you go through the normal lengthy process, it struggles to be up to date if we're talking about the cutting edge. But my colleague, Sue York from the Australian Research Society, has got this term about research thinking. And I think that is where we're really going to home in on the human in the process. So you can write a paper now that is going to be applicable in 2 years about how does research thinking shape how you need to use tools. The tools will change, but the thinking about what we need to do, that we need to be working on, focusing on the shift from research questions to business questions. So traditionally in Insights, we've focused on research questions, but actually we're trying to help companies make better decisions. Almost no corporation has a research project, a market research project. They have a new drink project. They have a new movie they're making project. They have a new railway they're building project. And they need to answer some questions. And that's when we bring in Insights to help make those decisions. So really focusing on how we help the organization make better decisions. What are the problems they have? How do we get those, the advice we're giving to be taken and implemented? So learning more about our own organization and learning what the insights can add to it. That's all really human stuff, and it's going to stay really human stuff for the next 5 or 10 years. There are talks about general AI further down the road. There are also disagreements about whether it's 25 years away or 5 years away. So we really don't need to worry about that, because most insight managers won't be in the same role in 5 years anyway. So there's plenty of human focused stuff we can do now. And that can be planned for.
You've almost answered a question that I was about to ask, which is how far into the future are you looking right now? Now, you just mentioned 5 and 25. I'll ask it from the perspective of somebody who is entering a career now, at the beginning of their Insights career. How far into the future should that person be looking to see, do I have a career? And this, of course, is something that an Insights leader needs to care about. Their team will be asking themselves these questions. How far into the future do I need to look to answer the question, am I in the right job?
But I'm going to back up to the insight manager first in the corporation, then we'll come back to the starter, because it's a very different answer. If I was an insight manager, I would be looking between 1.5 years and 2.5 years. Everything I might start using now, I might want to finish using 2.5 years from now, because the rate of change is so fast. The new tools are coming along. It's got to pay for itself. It cannot be massively disruptive to how I organize my work and my people and my teams, because disruption takes 6 to 9 months to settle down. And if this thing's only going to be useful for 2.5 years, the new thing's coming in before that, there isn't a good payback period. So really quite short timelines in terms of the insight manager. But if I'm joining the career now, I'm going to be assuming that I won't stay in the industry, and the industry won't be what it is today. So I need to build a portfolio of skills. And if we look at the insights industry, the ability to understand organizations, the ability to synthesize information, the ability to ask the right questions are going to be fundamental skills. And all of those are things that I'm going to want to adapt. I want to find out, do I want to be a leader or do I want to be a technician? Because if I want to be a leader, then that is going to lead me to certain types of organizations. I should expect to change company every couple of years, 2.5 years. I probably would like to go agency side, then client side, and then into another function, and to keep moving along. Now, you may start off with that plan and find out you end up with the same company for 40 years because it works for you. That's fine, because that means you have simply identified it as the best option each time. But your thinking should be, how do I acquire these skills? I would be inclined to get certification. Don't be too narrow. But at the moment, absolutely be looking at the AI stuff within your realm, and realize what you no longer need to learn in the same way. So I teach a course for the Market Research Society and some others on the use of advanced statistics. And over the last year or two, I've increasingly said, right, I'm going to show you how we do this. You don't need to memorize any of it, because if this occurs, go to the likes of ChatGPT and type in, what are Shapley values? What are Johnson values? What are the merits, and how do I use them? So all you need to remember is, if I've got multicollinearity between my attributes, I want to do driver analysis, I should ask what the alternatives are. That is what you need to remember. When I was learning it, you had to remember how to do it.
Yeah.
So just adapting what your process is, knowing what is the key thing you need to know. And the key thing to know is that sometimes this gives you a problem and you need to look for an alternative. It's almost the limit of what you need to know. Whereas knowing the difference between the median and the mean is still important.
I want to ask, just before I move on to another subject, I want to ask a kind of extreme version of that. There's a lot of talk, and I've read a lot from people who have thought about AI and the revolution that AI can cause in the economy, so broader than just the insights industry, who believe that there is potential for artificial intelligence and possibly real-world AI, in other words, bots, etc., who can do things in the physical world that currently only humans can do, which will mean that, unlike in previous revolutions, industrial revolution, for example, the printing press, the cotton gin, all these, the steam engine, all of these advances or triggers to rapidly advancing economy that have happened in the past, that this one is different, and it's materially different. And we are going to have to think about what we're going to do as individuals, because the economy will provide abundance for us, because energy will be next to cost next to nothing. And so there'll be abundance without us having to work. Have you thought about what that means for that young researcher we talked about that's joining this insights team? What does that mean for that individual?
Okay, so this is, we right at the beginning, we talked about some of the advantages of being older. And one of the ones here is we've seen these sort of loops come through before. So I think we're less sold on the short-term impact of those. That's not to say they're not disruptive. So I'm just going to jump back. If we take the printing press created the revolutions in Europe and places like this. We had Thomas Paine writing about the rights of man. We had Bibles being produced in English instead of Latin, which led to hundreds of years of wars. In one of those in Germany, I think something like 30% of the population died. Enormous impact of a technology like that. When we had the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the steam engine in the UK, life expectancy dropped considerably because we moved from working in the fields in rural situations to slums in the cities, poor sanitation, poor health, dangerous environment. So progress can have really big negative impacts. And one of my favorite examples is the invention of the automation of glass blowing, which started in New York. It was one of the founder parts. And so people used to blow glass. It used to be a trade. It used to be quite profitable. And in came this automated manufacture of glass. Most of the artisans lost their jobs. But more people became employed on lower wages because we had this mass production. New uses were found for glass. So all of a sudden, we had preserved food and we had medicines being given away in glass. Health improved massively because of the introduction of these new technologies for food. And then eventually we develop an artisan glass section. So it changes things, you get these consequences. Are we going to see in the next 25 years. Energy so abundant, climate catastrophe tackled, general AI that's going to be doing lots and lots of things that we leave us spare. I don't think so. I think that we will be doing well if we get to the 3-day week. One or two places are heading towards the 4-day week, but I think we've got the 3-day week. We've got some really interesting problems around the aging population. So in most richer countries, we are not going to have enough people to look after people like me and you. So we're going to need a lot of that technology. Japan is pushing really heavily towards having bots to help care for people when they're older. So I think that we're going to see some big changes, but those changes will not happen. I am fairly sure that 10 years from now, we are not going to be in a situation where there are far too few jobs. However, a lot of people will lose their job. So then, as a percentage of the industry, the whole world, it's going to be 3 or 4%, 5%. But of course, if you're one of the people in that, it's massive.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I reckon that in the market research industry, over the last, well, since I joined the industry, something like 1 million people have lost their job because of automation. They were the people who used to print the survey questionnaires, post the survey questionnaires. They were the people who knocked on doors and filled in the questionnaires, interviewing people. They were the people that punched that data. They were the people in the CATI centers phoning everybody up and doing surveys. And all of these processes have gone. Now, there is a prospect of AI taking jobs from people like us. And that changes the concern about the automation, because it's no longer everyone at the bottom level. And I think if anybody who is too cautious, who think none of this is going to happen, should look at the screenwriters. It is quite clear now that for TV commercials, most screenwriting work has gone, and it's going to be done by AI. I've got friends who work in the screenwriting business. They're not getting any calls now because a creative who wants to create a new TV commercial can specify it. The AI generates that, and you can now get voices. You can get actors who will then play those roles again with automation. So that is genuine creativity. It's allowing the creative at the ad agency to be more creative than they used to be able to, because their ability to shape what the screenwriter would do and to shape what the actors would do is less than it is now. So they have become empowered, but the screenwriters have lost their job.
Yeah, they can iterate.
And screenwriting is really creative.
Yeah. When we started this conversation, I had no idea we were going to be talking about glass blowing in New York. It's a fantastic anecdote, and it led to a great insight. There's one more. I want to loop back to AI in our industry now, if I may, just to finish it off. Two related topics. One is the rise of synthetic responses in research, which of course is facilitated by AI. And as a related topic, I'm interested in your thoughts on the ethics of that and other aspects of AI in our industry. So just thinking about synthetic responses first, what are your thoughts?
So synthetic data is going to be enormous. So synthetic data is slightly bigger than synthetic responses. It's been around for a long time in places. So most countries, when they produce the census data, add perturbations. They put random noise into that so that you can give people regional data for a block, a city block, without disclosing actually who said what. So the data you're looking at has got synthetic data in. Every time we had missing data and we used imputation to calculate that was synthetic data. When you do hierarchical Bayes as part of a choice modeling, that is synthetic data. There are people around who do virtual eye tracking. Virtual eye tracking is where I show you a box and the AI says where people would have looked. And that's an AI learning process based on real people. That again is synthetic data. So it's been around, but now it's just taking off big time. And it's coming at a time when real data from panel companies has got this, 30% of it's not very good. Now, synthetic data responding to bad questions is probably going to be just as bad as anything else responding to bad questions. But about the fraudulent, now there's a bit of a tension. So for me, the biggest question about synthetic data is, does it work? Because that is not easy to prove. Because of this plausibility we talked about earlier, it's quite easy to generate AI generative systems that will give you plausible answers. So how do we know that it definitely works or doesn't work? And anyway, if it works today, would it work next year? Because wouldn't we learn how to do it? Would it still be getting enough fresh data coming in to keep those models up to date? So I was talking to a bank the other day, and they've got these long-term tracking studies. And I said, well, pretty much all of that stuff for that 20 years where interest rates were around 1% is irrelevant to you now that interest rates are around 5%. The world has changed and inflation has gone from 1% to 6, 7, 8%. So your old data is no good. Now imagine you were using the synthetic data. All that synthetic data predicated on low interest rates and low inflation would clearly be problematic. So we've got a whole new set of testing. And what are the ethics around that process? The next question around sort of the ethics is all about transparency. What can you tell people? How can you tell it? How can you let them know what the confidence intervals are? There is perhaps another issue, which is if I'm a corporation, I'm a Procter & Gamble, and I've paid an agency to collect data, and I then build synthetic data from that, so I never need to buy the data again from the Cantars, the Ipsoses, and so on. Is that fair use of that information? Or is it unethical to say, I'm going to pay them for insights, but actually I'm going to build a reusable tool and take that business away from them? And this is exactly the same issue as things like ChatGPT. If it reads my book and then provides information, so it pays, even if it paid to read my book, it pays the $50 or $60 that it require, reads it, and then it repeatedly reuses that book, so nobody needs to buy my book again. That is, it's not allowed to reprint the book, it's not allowed to photocopy it. So we've got some ethical issues around that in terms of synthetic data. But synthetic data is going to be big. There are no two ways around that. We will see more and more synthetic data over the next 2 to 3 years. My personal prediction, in 10 years, it will be a larger percentage of projects than fresh data.
You made a comment there that it's hard to, or you might have even said you can't test the veracity of the data or how good the data is. Would it be over a long period of time, or would it not be possible to test use of synthetic data, use of conventional data, and just see which causes better things to happen in businesses?
Yes, and which is what we did when we brought online data collection in. Yeah. And just to remind everybody, online data collection, when we tested it, when we started to bring it in, we discovered that it was much faster, it was much cheaper, and it was not as good. And we adopted it. So if we give decision makers that choice again, I would expect them to make a similar vote. But there are some problems, and if let's assume that our normal data collection using surveys gets about 60% of the right answer, And maybe the synthetic data gets 70% of the right answer. They could have as little as 30% in common, because they could be answering different parts of the process. So the fact that your synthetic data does not replicate your survey data doesn't mean the synthetic data is wrong. It might be giving you a better answer percentage-wise, which is why your question about which helps you make better business decisions is important.
That
really means insight managers need to be much better at the ROI, because effectively that's the ROI. Have we made a better decision with this technique per dollar than we did with that technique per dollar? So that is one of the good things here. However, and this is what I was talking about before, if synthetic data was better than fresh data in October 2023, it might be worse in March 2024. There isn't any method, and all of the checking would be inductive. So it's worked 3 times, we think it's going to work again, which, you know, Karl Popper and the rest of the philosophers will say is not a good method of establishing that something is better. Just because we run 10 tests, and in 10 tests synthetic data beats fresh data, doesn't mean it will beat it on the 11th test. And there are all sorts of issues around when you reuse a technique, it often becomes worse, because people start to game it. It starts to, the world changes, a thing called endogeneity. So you get a feedback from how you're doing it. So the technique starts to become worse because the market understands it and factors it in. So there are some quite interesting philosophical challenges underpinning the practical problems with synthetic data.
Let me just share a quick anecdote with you, and then we'll wrap this up just on with this ethics question. There is, I believe, I don't know whether it has proceeded, but there was an approach to the Commerce Commission here in New Zealand by somebody who was upset that a member of the Research Association was using synthetic responses, synthetic data in their research. And the complaint to the Commerce Commission, the substance of the complaint was that they were presenting this as market research, where it can't be market research because market research has to involve real people. To me, that touches on this ethics issue, but it could become a bit of a legal issue. Have you heard of anything similar happening anywhere?
Not that I've heard of cases against people like ChatGPT because they've got inappropriate use of people's materials. Mm-hmm. And therefore that is not defendable. I think in most places, a definition of market research having to be based on real people would be curious, because certainly if I think back to my younger days, one of Nielsen's things was they used to go into stores and count how many cans of beans there were on the stores, and all of that. Of course, that is now all automated. But that was not about people, that we were counting objects. When we look at the market research usability testing, some usability testing is simply an algorithm that looks at the website that talks about the scores of that and doesn't use people. So I don't think that in its general usage globally, market research has to include talking to people, measuring people, watching people. It can look at options and things around that. And I think we need to be quite flexible. So there was a study done by a guy called Reynolds 20, 30 years, no, more than 20 years ago, where he was looking at how birds fly, murmurations of things like thrushes, and developed simulation models that eventually worked out all they needed was 4 factors, the bird to the left, bird to the right, and so on. And that then modeled it through. Now, that didn't use any real birds and actually solved the problem of, here is one method by which this is possible. Before that, we thought it was impossible for birds to do what we could see them doing. And that is obviously unsatisfactory. By using simulations, synthetic data, they were able to find, well, here is at least one method which is really simple and people can do it. So I think that we need to be open to a lot more thinking, but I think that it's also beneficial to have those sort of court cases. I think it's going to be difficult for judges to get their heads around some of them.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty sure I have not heard whether or not there has been. I suspect, for all the reasons that you've shared, that it probably hasn't and it probably won't, which I think is probably a really good thing. So, look, on that note, Ray, this has been a fascinating discussion. There's still plenty of things that we could talk about, but I've taken a lot of your time already, and I know you've probably got a big day ahead of you. I want to thank you on behalf of the Now That's Significant podcast, and wish you all the very best for the days ahead, and for your leadership at ESOMAR, your leadership of all the companies that you run, and everything that you do for the industry. We thank you.
Thanks, Geoff. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Absolutely. Cheers, Ray. Bye-bye.
Bye.